No one lends money without assessing the risk. As a private equity lender, I analyze every loan based on two critical questions. What is the purpose of the loan? And what is the borrower's exit strategy? If there is no viable exit strategy, no way for the borrower to repay principal and interest, the loan is a guaranteed loss. Any rational person would refuse to lend under such conditions. Now apply this same logic to the United States. Why would any leader willingly commit the nation to obligations it can never repay? Why would they take out endless loans with no exit strategy, while simultaneously opening the borders to an unchecked invasion that further drains resources? No responsible leader would ever do this. Yet Joe Biden and his puppet masters have done exactly that, not out of incompetence, but with deliberate intent. Their goal was not to govern, but to extract.
4 weeks ago today, I signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law, a single most important legislation passed in the Congress to combat inflation, and one of the most significant laws in our nation's history, in my view. Nobody this year, the American people won, the climate deniers lost, and the Inflation Reduction Act takes the most aggressive action to combat climate, as the speaker said, ever.
Joe Biden's final act as president revealed to the world he is corrupt. In the final minutes of his presidency, the 82-year-old issued get-out-of-jail-free cards to his entire family for any non-violent crimes that they may have committed.
You're not going to see in our administration that kind of approach to pardons, nor are you going to see in our administration the approach to making policy by tweets. It's just going to be a totally different way in which we approach the justice system.
And why did Joe Biden need to make sure that the pardons he issued date back to January 1, 2014? What happened in 2014? Well, it's the year that Hunter Biden joined the board of Burisma, the Ukrainian energy company, despite lacking any experience in the energy sector.
They aren't stewards of the nation, they're looters, stripping America's wealth, sovereignty, and stability while masquerading as its protectors. The destruction of America was not accidental, it was calculated. Sabotage disguised as incompetence has been the regime's most effective weapon.
As you know, we inherited from the last administration an economic catastrophe and an inflation nightmare. Their policies drove up energy prices, pushed up grocery costs, and drove the necessities of life out of reach for millions and millions of Americans.
By flooding the nation with millions of illegal migrants, driving debt to unsustainable levels, and engineering an economy based on forced redistribution rather than productivity, they've orchestrated an economic collapse that ensures permanent dependency. This was not mismanagement. It was a premeditated dismantling of America's foundations.
Over the past 4 years, 21 million people poured into the United States. Many of them were murderers, human traffickers, gang members, and other criminals from the streets of dangerous cities all throughout the world. Because of Joe Biden's insane and very dangerous open border policies, Joe Biden didn't just open our borders, he flew illegal aliens over them to overwhelm our schools, hospitals, and communities throughout the country. Entire towns like Aurora, Colorado, and Springfield, Ohio, buckled under the weight of the migrant occupation and corruption like nobody's ever seen before. Beautiful towns destroyed.
The intent was self-evident: alter the nation's demographics, erase its cultural identity, and consolidate power into the hands of an entrenched ruling class, i.e., the deep state. Biden was never the mastermind. He was merely a deteriorating figurehead, a puppet suffering from dementia, installed to shield the true architects of America's decline, those who orchestrated this destruction from the shadows and must now be exposed. Their method was simple but effective: overwhelm the system with unsustainable demands, housing shortages, collapsing healthcare, overburdened schools, and skyrocketing welfare costs. Recklessly printing money and spending at unprecedented levels, the government has systematically devalued the dollar, severing the connection between real income and actual wealth creation. This ensures that hard work yields less, while government-driven debt skyrockets, forcing Americans into an economy where survival was increasingly dependent on borrowing rather than earning. Meanwhile, the explosion of government jobs, positions that create no tangible economic value, serves only to justify an ever-expanding bureaucracy where employment was based not on productivity, but on sustaining a bloated system that exists solely to feed itself. Work was redefined as a title rather than a contribution, solidifying an economy where inefficiency is rewarded, while true wealth creators are punished. The grotesque inception of ESG and DEI, a calculated scheme to dismantle merit, enforce ideological conformity, and institutionalize division under the false pretense of fairness, ensuring incompetence is rewarded while excellence is punished.
How much, Joe, have you looked at, Larry Fink, Soros, State Street, Vanguard, BlackRock? How much have you looked at what they're doing and what their ties are? If you Google the largest shareholder for Raytheon, 3 out of the 4 top shareholders of Raytheon, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. You'll find the amount of money we spent in our military, $744 billion on how much we're making from defense, but you'll see some numbers saying last year it's 13% of our GDP, which is around $850 billion. That's more than the next 10 combined. Okay, let's go look at Hollywood. Same thing you see there. Let's go look at pharmaceutical. Let's go look at this. And you're like, wait a minute. These guys essentially have a monopoly. Well, how big is BlackRock? $10 trillion. How big is $10 trillion? Only 2 countries have a bigger GDP than what BlackRock has, assets under management. That's how big BlackRock is. So then they went and they started getting all these other guys to sign on and say, hey, we want you to participate with the same thing as well with ESG. And they ended up having, I think they had 31 signers. I think end of 2022, they got 60 something signers for a total of $70 trillion of assets under management that they're controlling. They have that much control to get everybody to do what they want them to do? Yes. So Dylan Mulvaney, who cares? Why? Bud Light. How does that tie up? You got the DEI, the HRC, the human rights, and all this stuff. And then you go even deeper. And you look at that, and you go deeper in that with Open Society and who's funding it, who's the money behind these organizations. Comes back, Soros.
Drive the middle class into economic servitude, ensuring they are too financially burdened to resist. What we were witnessing was not governance. It was the orchestrated dismantling of a nation, disguised as compassion and progress. The carefully crafted narrative, we are a nation of immigrants, was weaponized to justify unchecked illegal migration, with zero regard for the economy's ability to absorb, sustain, or assimilate such an influx. This was not about humanitarianism. It was about deliberately overwhelming the system, straining public resources, destabilizing communities, and shifting political power through mass demographic manipulation. What they framed as inclusivity was in reality the calculated erosion of national sovereignty, a policy of destruction masked as virtue. The middle class is the backbone of a free society. It is the greatest obstacle to tyranny. For the ruling elite deep state, this makes the middle class a threat that must be eliminated. Their strategy was as ruthless as it was deliberate. Dismantle a self-reliant, independent populace and replace it with a permanently dependent underclass, one that is compliant, manipulatable, and reliant on government handouts. The undeniable proof of this betrayal lies in the government's own resistance to accountability. The so-called public servants, who claim to be defending the Constitution, have waged war against DOJ, the agency tasked with exposing their rampant waste, fraud, and abuse of taxpayer money.
We are here to fight back!
They aren't fighting for the preservation of the Constitution. They're fighting to protect their corruption. Donald Trump enlisted Elon Musk, a private citizen with no government salary, to conduct an audit of government expenditures. The findings were damning: systemic fraud, massive mismanagement, and outright theft on a scale previously hidden from public scrutiny.
So, in the interest of transparency, look at some of the initial things that we found. In the Air Force, $1.9 million for holistic DEI transformation and training, $6 million to the University of Montana to strengthen American democracy by bridging divides. At the Defense Human Resources Activity, $3.5 million for support to DEI groups. And how about this one? $1.6 million to the University of Florida to study social and institutional detriments of vulnerability and resilience to climate hazards in African Sahel. You see, folks, this stuff is not a core function of our military.
$1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbia's workplaces, $70,000 for a production of a DEI musical in Ireland, $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia, $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru, $2 million for sex changes in Guatemala, $6 million to fund tourism in Egypt, $20 million on a new Sesame Street show in Iraq, $4.5 million to combat disinformation in Kazakhstan.
The deeper the audit goes, the clearer it becomes. Public service has been weaponized into public theft.
$22 billion from HHS to provide free housing and cars for illegal aliens. $45 million for diversity, equity, and inclusion scholarships in Burma. $40 million to improve the social and economic inclusion of sedentary migrants. Nobody knows what that is. $8 million to promote LGBTQI+ in the African nation of Lesotho, which nobody has ever heard of. $60 million for indigenous peoples and Afro-Colombian empowerment in Central America. $8 million for making mice transgender. This is real. $32 million for a left-wing propaganda operation in Moldova. $10 million for male circumcision in Mozambique. $20 million for the Arab Sesame Street. A $3.5 million consulting contract for lavish fish monitoring. $1.5 million for voter confidence in Liberia. $14 million for social cohesion in Mali. $59 million for illegal alien hotel rooms in New York City. He's a real estate developer. He's done very well. $47 million for improving learning outcomes in Asia. Asia's doing very well with learning. We know what we're doing. We should use it ourselves. And $101 million for DEI contracts at the Department of Education. The most ever paid, nothing even like it. Many more have been found out and exposed and swiftly terminated by a group of very intelligent, mostly young people, headed up by Elon, and we appreciate it. We found hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud.
Unfortunately for this cartel of political thieves and associates, Trump and Musk have become formidable roadblocks to their ultimate goal, replacing the American electorate with a compliant underclass while monetizing the nation's theft of $36 trillion. This financial black hole, created through decades of waste, fraud, and outright theft, was never meant to be repaid, only exploited to consolidate power and funnel wealth to the ruling elite. To understand how America was being dismantled, you must first understand the zero-sum economy, the perverse economic model of the deep state. In a reciprocal economy, both sides benefit. Hard work is rewarded, trade is fair, and prosperity is shared. But under Bidenomics, the system was rigged. One side gains only when the other loses. This was an economy of predators, where productivity was punished and government-sanctioned theft was rebranded as equity. Inflation was not an accident, it was a policy. It is the ultimate weapon of economic theft. A system designed to rob the working class in broad daylight while enriching the ruling elite. By printing money out of thin air, those in power systematically devalue the wages and savings of everyday Americans, eroding their financial independence while consolidating wealth at the top. As inflation accelerates, the cost of survival outpaces earnings, forcing citizens into perpetual debt just to maintain their quality of life. This was no accident. It was a deliberate transfer of power, where prosperity was no longer tied to hard work and production, but to who controls the printing press. In this rigged economy, the people are enslaved by debt, while the elite profit from the collapse of purchasing power. A silent coup against the very foundation of economic freedom. Home values and stock prices rise, but so does the cost of food, gas, and basic necessities. The average worker struggles to keep up, while the ruling class watches from the sidelines, immune to the suffering as asset allocation distorts into theft by debt. This was not economic growth. It was a calculated transfer of wealth. The middle class loses purchasing power while the elite manipulate asset values to their advantage. Ask yourself, how do career politicians with modest government salaries amass dynastic fortunes?
Many congresspeople see their wealth grow by thousands of percentage points after they're elected, and the majority of our federal lawmakers are full-on millionaires.
The answer is simple: corruption. The national debt has surpassed $36 trillion, with annual interest payments exceeding $1 trillion. Every taxpayer is now shackled with over $340,000 in government debt, a crushing financial obligation imposed without consent. Meanwhile, the average American's net worth sits at just $595,000, meaning the government has already stripped away 57% of the wealth you've built. In the year 2000, that figure was 47.9%. Over just 2 decades, you've lost an additional 10% of your net worth, not through market forces, not by your own decisions, but by reckless, deliberate government spending designed to trap future generations in a cycle of inescapable debt. Unlike a fixed loan with clear terms, this debt doesn't come due just once. It's siphoned from you every single day. Inflation is the silent tax that ensures you never stop paying. By systematically debasing the currency, the government makes every dollar you earn, save, and invest worth less over time. It is the ultimate tool of economic servitude, allowing the ruling elite to manipulate assets, devalue your labor, and extract wealth without ever sending you a bill. This isn't economic mismanagement. This isn't bad policy. This is theft on a national scale, disguised as governance. Where is the benefit associated with this ever-increasing public debt made on your behalf? Are your real wages higher? Do you have better health care? Are your children receiving a better education? No, because the wealth tied to this debt was never meant for you. It has been siphoned into the pockets of government cronies, globalist corporations, and a bloated welfare state. Not to support the needy, but to buy votes, protect the ongoing theft, and shield the ruling class from accountability.
With this latest withdrawal, they're admitting these schemes were nothing more than a dishonest attempt to buy votes by transferring debt onto taxpayers who never went to college or worked to pay off their loans. And although President Biden didn't achieve his goal of widespread loan bailouts, what he did manage to do was cost taxpayers $180 billion. He cleared the debts of nearly 5 million borrowers, and all of it was on your dime.
Bidenomics was never an economic strategy. It was a deliberate wealth extraction operation, engineered to deplete national resources, erode the financial stability of hardworking Americans, and push the country toward inevitable collapse. It is the macroeconomic equivalent of the corrupt, self-enriching deals brokered by Biden's son, where personal profit is prioritized over the interests of the American people, selling out their future for the benefit of an elite few. This system was deliberately designed to reward dependence and punish productivity, ensuring that those who contribute nothing remain compliant and complicit, while those who work, build, and produce are systematically looted under the guise of equity.
Come next year, Americans who receive $600 or more on their third-party payments systems like Venmo will receive a tax form to a provision put into the American Rescue Plan. For instance, if you sold an old couch and received payment for it of over $600, you could trigger an IRS audit. This reporting requirement will not be targeting the wealthy as it was designed for, but middle-class Americans who often send and receive money via Venmo and other services. The new 87,000 new IRS agents hired through the Democrat plan will be very busy.
The deep state's role in this theft was not just in execution, but in carefully crafting its narrative, branding mass wealth confiscation as some sort of moral crusade. They spent more time justifying and repackaging their corruption than they did governing, ensuring that the greatest economic heist in history was not just tolerated, but embraced by those too blinded by propaganda to see the reality of their own destruction. This wasn't taxation, it was economic warfare. The weapon of choice? The US dollar itself. By manipulating inflation and escalating costs, they stripped the value of every paycheck, every savings account, and every investment, ensuring that the benefits of hard work were erased faster than they could be realized. Reversing the economic and societal collapse inflicted upon this nation demands an aggressive, unapologetic, and uncompromising approach. The era of incrementalism is over. Half measures and political posturing will no longer suffice. The foundational pillars of American sovereignty, prosperity, and cultural identity must be restored without hesitation or negotiation. America's survival depends on dismantling the parasitic zero-sum economic model and rebuilding a system of mutual prosperity. This isn't radical, it's fundamental. Trump's America First doctrine was never just a slogan. It was a strategic blueprint for an economy rooted in fairness, strength, and reciprocal trade.
6 weeks ago, I stood beneath the dome of this Capitol and proclaimed the dawn of the golden age of America. From that moment on, it has been nothing but swift and unrelenting action to usher in the greatest and most successful era in the history of our country. We have accomplished more in 43 days than most administrations accomplished in 4 years or 8 years, and we are just getting started.
The American worker, American industry, and American middle class must come first, before foreign adversaries, corrupt insiders, and those who seek to exploit the nation's wealth without contribution. Globalist policies have bled the American worker dry, shifting wealth overseas while ensuring that those who actually produce receive the smallest slice of the pie. This ends now. We must rebuild domestic industry, cut dependence on foreign production, end job-killing trade agreements, and ensure that economic policy serves those who contribute, not those who leech off the system. The federal government must be stripped down to its constitutional purpose, serving the American citizen, not itself. The bloated, self-serving bureaucracy that perpetuates waste, fraud, and theft must be dismantled. Under Biden, the administrative state has abandoned its duty to the people, transforming into a rogue entity that enriches itself while weaponizing government against its own citizens. The deep state's zero-sum economic policies are a direct attack on the working and middle class, designed to crush self-sufficiency and force compliance through financial servitude. Reversing this requires bold, decisive action, not timid reform. The bureaucratic stranglehold must be broken by eliminating unnecessary federal agencies, holding corrupt officials accountable, and returning power to the states and the people. America's survival depends on restoring self-governance, fiscal responsibility, and a government that operates for the exclusive benefit of its lawful citizens. The United States cannot afford to pay the financial, cultural, or security costs associated with an embedded illegal population designed to undermine national stability. The notion that removal must be gradual is a deliberate deception, a strategy of self-destruction designed to normalize and entrench the invasion. Self-deportation must be swift, aggressive, and absolute. There is no future for a nation that subsidizes its own replacement. Every social service, government benefit, and employment opportunity provided to illegal aliens must be terminated immediately. This is not about inhumanity. This is about national survival. The American taxpayer should not be forced to finance an illegal occupation that drains resources, cripples public institutions, and displaces the children of American citizens in their own country. The collapse of public schools, hospitals, housing markets, and wages is not coincidental. It is intentional. The goal has always been to dilute and replace the American population, ensuring a dependent, government-controlled underclass. This agenda must be crushed without delay. This is not a policy debate. It is a war for survival. America's economic and cultural foundation has been under attack for decades, and we are now at the breaking point. The restoration of the Republic requires decisive action, without apology, without hesitation, and without compromise. We either reclaim our nation now, or we lose it forever. No compromise, no retreat, no surrender.